We're constantly swimming in this sea of information, aren't we? And finding that clear signal, especially on things that really hit close to home, like public safety, well, that's what we try to do here. Welcome to the deep dive. We sift through the noise, line up the sources, and pull out what really matters, making it relevant for you. Today, we're looking hard at proposals to reform firearms training and licensing standards here in Florida. Specifically, we're focusing on Class G licenses. Those are the ones often held by armed security officers, private investigators, people carrying guns on duty. We've got a couple of key sources: a formal letter from a law firm representing a firearms training school, and, crucially, a press release from that same school that just landed today, which really turns up the heat.
That's right. So our mission today is to unpack these documents. We want to look at the specific problems these experts have flagged, understand the fixes they're suggesting, and think about what it all means for safety in Florida, especially, given how urgent they say this is. And maybe the biggest question is why proposals like these, dealing with safety, might sit unanswered for so long.
Okay, right. Let's unpack this then. So our first source is this formal letter. It's from Penalta and Associates PA, that's a law firm, and it's dated January 10th, 2024. It went straight to Wilton Simpson, who's the commissioner of the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, FDECS. They sent it on behalf of their client, Valortech USA.
And Valortech USA, they're not small players. They're described as a world-class firearms training institution right here in Orlando. They train a whole mix of civilians, both American and international, law enforcement, even military folks. What's really key here is who identified these problems with the Class G standards. It's a Herfel Torres. He's a co-owner at Valtech, a bilingual master law enforcement instructor. This guy is seeing these issues day in, day out. He's trained thousands, so this comes from direct, hands-on experience.
Okay, and then comes the kicker, the second source. This press release from Valortech, dated today, September 5th, 2025. And the headline, well, it grabs you. Florida firearms training experts propose urgent reforms to address active shooter threats. And then the subheadline, government inaction leaves critical gaps in public safety. Oof.
Yeah, oof is right. And what's really fascinating, like you said, is the timeline. You got this detailed formal proposal sent off in January 2024. Then, crickets. Over a year and a half later, they put up this press release talking about government inaction, saying they haven't had any official response. It creates this real tension. What do you think typically causes these kinds of delays? I mean, especially when someone's ringing the alarm about public safety.
That's a really good question. And it's often not just, someone ignoring it. It can be the whole machinery of government. Think internal reviews, maybe needing to talk to different groups, finding the budget, or just other laws taking priority. It shows how even things that seem really urgent, especially if they have big ripple effects, can get bogged down in that policy-making process. But clearly, Valotech feels time's run out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's dig into why they feel it's so urgent. They've laid out 5 main areas where they see critical problems in Florida's Class G firearms standards and training.
Right. Let's get into those key findings. First up is something that sounds maybe technical, but has huge safety implications. Target distance during proficiency tests. What's the issue there?
Well, the current manual for the Class G test, it's surprisingly fuzzy on a really important detail. How far apart multiple targets should be. Because there's no specific rule, you get all sorts of inconsistency. Sometimes instructors or even the target companies put the targets right next to each other on one sheet of paper, maybe just inches apart.
Okay, and why is that bad? I mean, it sounds like it might make the test easier, maybe, but easier isn't necessarily safer, is it?
Exactly. Easier isn't better here. Doing that basically ignores a crucial skill they call target/threat acquisition. That's your ability to spot a threat, engage it, and then quickly shift to another threat that's somewhere else. In any real situation with more than one threat, you have to be able to do that fast. If the test isn't actually checking if someone can do that, it's just not preparing them for dynamic, life or death situation. Think about it. If you or someone you care about needs protection from someone with this license, you'd want their training to cover that kind of situation, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So what does Velotech say we should do about it? How does their fix make things safer?
It's pretty straightforward. They propose a minimum standard. Targets need to be at least 3 feet apart, 1 yard. The benefits seem pretty clear. First, it makes the test the same everywhere. Second, it actually tests if the person can handle multiple threats. Third, it just makes them better prepared for real life. And finally, it kind of brings Florida's standards up to speed with what law enforcement and the military already do. It's about making sure a basic, vital skill is actually being tested.
That makes a lot of sense for a job with such high stakes. And sticking with that idea of being prepared, Velotech also takes issue with the passing score for the Class G test. Right now, you need 168 points out of 240 to pass. Velotech says essentially that might not be good enough, not for situations where using that firearm could literally be life or death.
Yeah, this is where they bring in some pretty stark data. They point out that studies and just practical experience consistently show that people shooting accuracy tanks when they're under intense stress. They even cite research on police officers. Their accuracy can drop by up to 30% on average during active shooter events. And get this, even highly trained, expert shooters often only hit their target about 33% of the time under that kind of pressure. And the crucial thing to remember is that the test, it's done in a calm, controlled setting. None of the adrenaline, the fear, the chaos of a real encounter. That 33% number is, well, it's sobering when you think about what passing really means in the real world.
Wow, so the test score doesn't really reflect how someone might perform under extreme pressure. What's the proposed change, and what are the potential trade offs there?
They recommend bumping the minimum passing score up to 190 out of 240. The Lortic's reasoning is, look, people come in with different skill levels, sure, but raising the bar encourages better, more serious training. More importantly, it makes the test results mean more, aligning them with the very high-stakes, high-liability nature of using a gun professionally. It should better equip these licensees for when precision really truly matters. It's trying to build in a bigger safety margin.
Okay, that data about accuracy under stress is definitely compelling. But raising the score significantly like that, it could mean fewer people qualify for these licenses, right? Does Valortech talk about that side of it, like accessibility or making it harder for people to get trained?
The letter doesn't explicitly address, say, the potential impact on the number of licensed guards, but the underlying message seems clear. The responsibility that comes with carrying a firearm for protecting others is so immense that ensuring high competence has to be the top priority. It suggests that making the qualification tougher is a necessary trade-off for public safety. The focus isn't on making it easy to pass, but on making sure those who do pass are genuinely proficient for that high liability role.
Got it.
So, moving beyond the test itself, Velotech points to another major issue: who's actually doing the teaching, specifically for civilians outside that Class G license process. It sounds like there's a bit of a Wild West situation in Florida right now.
That's a good way to put it. They highlight a real lack of comprehensive oversight. Basically, lots of people or organizations are advertising and teaching firearms courses to civilians without needing proper state credentials, without following state laws. And this is pretty striking because the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the FDLE itself, calls firearms instruction a high-risk, high-liability activity.
Wait, so FTLE says it's high risk, but there's no real oversight for a lot of the civilian training. That seems like a huge disconnect.
It really does. And Velortech gives a specific example that raises eyebrows.
Oh, yeah. Who do they mention?
They point to organizations like the United States Concealed Carry Association, the USCCA. Now, USCCA offers its own instructor certification programs, but Velortech argues these programs just do not meet the rigorous standards that Florida sets for its own licensed Class K instructors. Class K instructors, just for context, are the ones certified for more advanced, tactical type training, and they already have to follow stricter state rules. The concern Velortech raises is that these other programs, like USCCA's, seem more focused on being marketing tools for insurance products, rather than providing truly comprehensive skills and safety training. They argue this waters down the quality of instruction and could put the public at risk.
Whoa, that's a pretty direct accusation, basically saying a business motive might be overshadowing safety training. What's your take on that? I mean, are there other perspectives? Maybe USCCA sees their training differently?
Well, it's definitely a strong criticism coming from Velortech, highlighting what they see as a potential conflict. The documents we have don't include a response from USCCA, but you'd imagine they would argue their programs are valuable and thorough. However, Velotech keeps bringing it back to the state's established, rigorous standards. Their point is that anyone teaching civilians how to use firearms, especially for self-defense or security, should have to meet those highest state benchmarks. It really circles back to that question of training integrity and ensuring consistent, state-approved safety standards, no matter who's running the class.
Okay, so if that's the problem, what's Velortech's proposed solution for regulating these instructors and making sure training is up to par?
It's pretty bold, actually. They recommend that all civilian firearms training in Florida, and they make an exception only for purely competitive or sports shooting, but everything else, including basic concealed carry classes or anything labeled tactical, should be conducted exclusively by licensed Class K instructors. Full stop. And on top of that, They want clear state guidelines for approving any outside training certifications and basically stop accepting certificates from programs like USCCAs that don't meet those state standards. The aim is to make sure every civilian getting trained is getting instruction based on Florida law, liability awareness, and established best practices.
Okay, so those are some very specific fixes, but Valortech also pushed for broader changes, right? Looking at the whole system, how do those fit in?
They absolutely do. And it shows they're thinking bigger picture, not just patching holes. For example, they talk about enhancing the training for the Class K instructors themselves, things like stress inoculation, more scenario-based training. That directly helps instructors teach students how to handle the real-world stress we talked about earlier. They also want regular updates to the curriculum, making sure standards like target spacing or passing scores keep up with new threats or better training methods. And they mentioned public awareness campaigns, basically educating Floridians so they know to look for properly licensed instructors. It ties it all together: better instructors, better standards, and an informed public. It's about building a stronger, more adaptable safety net overall.
Right, building that whole ecosystem. And then there's the final deficiency they identified, and this one touches on a really sensitive area, but one they frame as crucial for safety: making English the standard language for Class D and G training. First, can you quickly remind us Class D versus Class G, and what's the core safety issue Valortech sees here?
Sure. So Class D is for unarmed security. Class G is for armed security and PIs, the ones we've mostly been discussing. Votex starts by acknowledging Florida's incredible diversity, calling it a melting pot. They note that courses are currently offered in Spanish, Portuguese, Creole, and potentially other languages to help students who might not speak much English. But they argue, while that's well-intentioned for access, it creates serious safety risks. Their main concern is communication breakdown, especially in emergencies where guards need to interact effectively with police, paramedics, or the public. And they say this applies to both Class D and G. Clear communication is vital whether you're armed or not.
And they actually saw examples of this communication breakdown during training sessions. That makes it less theoretical, doesn't it?
It does. They mentioned observing candidates during proficiency tests who literally couldn't understand even basic commands or directions in English. And they use this really powerful analogy. Just as communications are life-critical skills in aeronautical operations, this lack of English comprehension in firearms training poses a direct threat to public safety. They're basically saying that in a crisis, a misunderstanding caused by a language barrier could have catastrophic consequences for the licensee, for law enforcement, for bystanders, anyone. It's that critical moment where clarity saves lives.
Okay, that's a stark warning. So what's the recommendation, especially given Florida's diversity? This feels like it would spark some debate.
It likely would. Velertech strongly recommends that the state's Division of Licensing establish English as the mandatory language of instruction and proficiency for all Class D and Class G training. This means everything: the books, the lectures, the tests, all in English. They also suggest checking for basic English comprehension right when someone applies for the license. And instructors would have a responsibility to make sure their students can understand and respond to essential commands in English before they even take the final proficiency test.
No, obviously they're framing this purely as a safety issue, but Florida is incredibly diverse, multilingual. How might a mandatory English rule affect certain communities? Did Volertech suggest any alternatives, maybe ways to balance safety and inclusivity?
They do explicitly say they respect and celebrate Florida's cultural diversity. But then they pivot right back to safety must remain the top priority for these kinds of jobs. The letter doesn't really explore alternative solutions like maybe bilingual instructors for certain parts or providing translation resources. Their recommendation is pretty firm. English proficiency is, in their view, a non-negotiable safety requirement for operating effectively in emergencies, especially interacting with first responders who predominantly use English. The goal, as they state it, is cutting down the risk of miscommunication in a crisis, making training consistent, and upholding safety standards for everyone.
Which brings us right back to where we started, really. That press release from today, September 5th, 2025, it hammers home that despite laying all this out, these detailed concerns, these specific recommendations, backed by experience more than 18 months ago, FDTS Commissioner Wilton Simpson and the responsible agencies have not yet issued a formal reply to the proposal, and Volertech is calling that silence unacceptable given the risks they see.
Yeah, the urgency just jumps off the page in that release. Herfel Torres himself is quoted saying things like, "These reforms are fast, efficient, and directly address the deficiencies that put lives at risk every single day." He says, every second counts at an active shooter event. Yet Florida's licensing standards are outdated, inconsistent, and in some cases dangerous. The state has the opportunity and the obligation to act now. Pretty strong words.
And Alexander Penalta, the lawyer who sent the original letter, echoes that. This is not just about regulations, it's about saving lives. The fact that these detailed, seemingly well-reasoned proposals from people on the front lines have apparently gone unanswered for so long, that really is the core tension here, isn't it?
It really is. And it leaves you, the listener, with a pretty big question, right? What happens when experts flag serious safety issues, offer concrete fixes based on data and experience, and then nothing? Or at least no public response from the agencies in charge of public safety. It really highlights that gap between identifying a problem and actually getting policy changed.
So, wrapping up today's deep dive, we've walked through Valortec's proposals to overhaul firearms training and licensing here in Florida. We looked at everything from how far apart targets should be, to passing scores, to who should be allowed to teach, and even the language of instruction. All of it aimed squarely at improving public safety and making sure armed personnel are truly prepared for high-stress situations. And hanging over it all is this urgent call for action and the mystery of the apparent silence from state officials.
Yeah, and maybe the thought to leave you with is this. Considering everything we've discussed, what responsibility do we as individuals and our governing bodies have to keep safety standards up to date, especially as threats change and our understanding of what makes training effective evolves? And maybe what role should transparency play when expert warnings about public safety seem to go unanswered?
Definitely something to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you a clearer picture of these really critical issues. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, stay informed.